here we are again.
Good day, I'm your humble narrator SideWaysThinker, and I'm just here with another episode of That There Enigmatic Entity, a series in which I discuss the more uncanny video game characters. In this episode, we will be discussing one of the most elusive video game characters in recent history, belonging to one of the most well-regarded game series in recent memory, the Portal series. First, a warning. Due to the nature of this character, and of this series generally, there will be many hefty spoilers for the Portal series. If you do not want the series spoiled for you, stop watching the video now. The Portal series, for the unaware, is a series of first-person puzzle platforming games published and developed by famed third-party game studio Valve. The game requires the use of a portal gun in order to solve puzzles, and move from test chamber to test chamber within the Aperture Science laboratory, all the while being harassed and mocked by the evil sentient AI GLaDOS. The second game introduced a new mechanic in the form of propulsion and repulsion gels, though the gameplay was still primarily driven by the use of the portal gun. In both games, the main draw was not the mechanics themselves, as well designed and fun to use as they are, but rather it was the black humour and amusing commentary of GLaDOS.
Did you know you can donate one or all of your vital organs to the Aperture Science Self-Esteem Fund for Girls? It's true.
Following in the Valve tradition of storytelling through the game environment, much of the narrative in Portal is not delivered to the character in dialogue, rather the majority of the story is to be read from the levels themselves. Examples of this would be the large number of observation rooms encountered in the test chambers during the first game, all of which are conspicuously empty. We will discuss this point and others in more detail as the video proceeds. As I'm sure you may have figured out by the title of the video, today we are discussing the character of Douglas Rattman, the insane sole survivor of GLaDOS' decimation of the Aperture Science laboratory staff. In my usual format, I would now explain every instance in which you come into contact with the Rattman. However, this is not the case today, as the player never actually encounters the Rattman in Portal 1 and 2. Rather, his presence is felt in the form of the countless Rattman dens found hidden behind panels in the Aperture Science test chambers. In the original Portal, there are 5 known Rattman dens, and they don't seem to hold much of significance in regard to being able to figure out the identity of the Rattman. Their purpose in the first game seems to be the logical continuation of the aforementioned empty observation rooms found around the test chambers, clear hintings of some previous cataclysm occurring in the facility that the robotic voice refuses to acknowledge, as well as giving the game a sense of mild dread before any clear threat has presented itself. A prime example of the vagary presented by the original dens is the fact that, prior to the release of Portal 2, one of the most prevalent Rattman theories was that he was a previous test subject, and not a scientist. The first den can be found in Test Chamber 16, and is probably the most obviously placed den in both games, as you are forced to see it while travelling through the level normally. I can only assume that this was placed in this way in order to pique the player's interest instantly, and to make them begin looking for the other dens. It should also be noted that this test chamber also has what I saw as the first of Rattman's attempts to help the player. In this test chamber, you first encounter the turrets, who must be defeated by knocking them over in some way. One of the turrets is sitting on a raised platform just to the side of the Rattman den. On the ceiling above the turret, there is an X scrawled in the same style as the text found in the Rattman dens. These begin to be found more and more frequently as you continue through the game. During the first game, it's not entirely clear if the Rattman is specifically trying to help you, the player, or if he is simply trying to help anyone else trapped in the facility by GLaDOS. His first den doesn't contain any highly useful hints as to the game or as to its identity, but it does foreshadow some future events, such as GLaDOS' promise of cake at the end of the test, causing the incredibly annoying "the cake is a lie" meme in the process. The second Rattman den is again fairly obvious, but ever so slightly more out of the way, as it is mildly more difficult to access and must be portaled into. This den suggests more of the madness of the Rattman, as it has many references to the deeply worrying, overly attached love and affection the Rattman attaches to the now famous weighted companion cube, as well as his deep-seated paranoia regarding the cameras in the facility watching him. From this point onwards, you cannot find any more Rattman dens until the end of the test, at which point you end up running loose through the Aperture Science facility. This time, most of the Rattman dens are directly in your path, with some slightly more hidden areas. It is in this section of the game that the player gets the most interaction with the Rattman, as his hinting scrawlings on the walls become much more frequent, and seem to be clearly attempting to direct Chell, and thus the player, towards GLaDOS for the final confrontation. After this confrontation, you are dragged back into the facility, the ending from the original game having been altered in order to better fit with the events of the second game, at which point the events of Portal 2 are set in motion.
Thank you for assuming the party escort submission position.
Before we move on to Portal 2, I think it is best to discuss the Lab Rat comic. The Lab Rat comic was a comic released for free online by Valve in order to explain the events before Portal 1 and in between Portal 1 and 2, as well as giving us the bulk of the currently known information regarding the Rattman. I'll link the comment in the description so you can read it for yourselves, but for now, I'll give a summary of sorts. The comic covers the events between Portal 1 and 2, as well as giving us the backstory to the Rattman. It establishes that prior to the decimation of the Aperture Science staff, Douglas Rattman was a scientist who seemed to be directly involved in the creation of GLaDOS, with a history of pronounced paranoia and schizophrenia. Through means unknown, he manages to survive GLaDOS' flooding of the facility with neurotoxin, going on to be pursued by GLaDOS for an unknown period of time, narrowly avoiding capture and stealing what supplies he could from the facility's cafeteria. He eventually comes across the test subject files after noticing that Chell had been rejected as a test subject due to her stubborn and tenacious nature. Seeing this, and deeming himself unable to do anything more than evade detection, Douglas alters the files so that Chell is accepted as a test subject, and then returns to fleeing from GLaDOS for an again unspecified amount of time until Chell awakens and defeats GLaDOS, losing his grip on reality as time passes. When Chell does eventually awaken, Douglas springs into action again, leaving markings in the test chambers to speed Chell's progress through the facility while he watches her closely from areas out of her view, now hopelessly mad and talking to a weighted companion cube that he keeps on his back. When he realises that Chell is real and not a figment of his imagination, he finds what is left of a bottle of medication, which we are to assume was prescribed to him in order to combat his paranoia and schizophrenia, which he had been saving for the end times. Upon Chell's defeat of GLaDOS at the end of the first game, Douglas flees to the surface, finally able to escape, only to see Chell being dragged back into the facility by an unidentified AI core. Upon seeing this, Douglas resolves to return to the facility, refusing to leave Chell to die after she unknowingly saved his life and gave him his freedom. After finding Chell, he realises that the cryo chamber she has been placed in has had its life support knocked offline when GLaDOS was destroyed, along with every other cryo chamber in the facility. In his attempt to free Chell, he is shot and injured by a group of turrets, leaving his only option being to patch Chell's cryo chamber into the reserve power in order to keep her alive, though indefinitely frozen, unless someone else wakes her up. After doing this, Douglas himself climbs into a different cryo chamber in order to sleep, though it is never established if he also patched his cryo chamber into the reserve power. So some believe this ending to the comic means he sacrificed himself to save Chell's life. Thus begins the events of Portal 2. Despite the Rattman's apparent death at the end of the Lab Rat comic, there are countless examples of his existence in Portal 2, which has led several people, myself included, to theorise that he must still be alive and helping Chell as she attempts to escape from the facility the second time. The first indication of this comes very early in the game when you find the blue portal gun standing alone on a pedestal surrounded by detailed Rattman paintings, though one of these, at least, was shown to have been completed prior to GLaDOS' first defeat. As you continue on through the facility, you continue to find more and more Rattman dens. The most prominent of these is the final Rattman den in the game, found in Test Chamber 17. This alone proves to me that Douglas Rattman survived, because when in this den you can hear him talking to himself behind the wall. This is the first and only time you ever hear the Rattman, and due to his now returned madness, it is difficult to understand what he is saying. In the files of Portal 2, if you unpack them correctly, you can actually find the raw audio of his voice. I have listened to it and have looked up various translations online. I will now play the audio and flash up the best translation I found.
It's commerce too. It's fire servers. It's started. It's just started. It's done now. It's on fuel and all these things. It's
While most of what Rattman says here is up for debate, the two things that seem to be agreed upon by most are that he clearly states that the ship is stolen, and that he refers to an Uncle Johnson. The ship is assumed to be the Borealis, an Aperture Science vessel that went missing, and is referred to in the Half-Life series. For the unaware, the Portal and Half-Life series both take place in the same universe, and Aperture Science was the direct competitor with the Black Mesa Research Facility. And the Uncle Johnson is believed to be Cave Johnson, implying either a blood relation or a close relationship between Douglas Rattman and Cave Johnson. At the moment, that is all that can be said about Douglas Rattman, though we must hope that Valve will eventually figure out how to count to 3, and thus bring us to the end of this excellent series and answer all of the still unanswered questions regarding the Rattman and more. But that is going to have to be all from me for now. I've been your humble narrator, SideWaysThinker, and as always, keep calm and carry on. Good day.
Only want you gone.